Lucas stared at the email confirming his 2-week business trip, his stomach sinking. It wasn't just the project's weight pressing on him, it was the thought of leaving his 6-year-old son behind. His ex-wife, completely absent. She had moved on so effortlessly that it felt like their son didn't exist to her anymore. The other day, she posted pictures from a luxury resort in Europe with her new husband, no mention of her child. No question about where he'd stay while Lucas was gone. Just a shrug when he asked, "You'll figure it out." He clenched his fists, anger mixing with helplessness. He had no one else to turn to but his parents. Sitting across from them in their living room, he tried to ignore the uneasy feeling growing in his chest as they nodded enthusiastically. "Of course, Lucas. He's our grandson. We'd love to have him." His mother's words sounded rehearsed, almost too eager, but Lucas needed to believe them. He had to trust someone. What choice did he have? Memories of his own childhood came rushing back, times when they'd left him alone for hours or canceled plans last minute because something better came up. They were never dependable then, and here he was again, hoping against hope that they'd changed, that they'd step up this time. As he outlined his son's routine meals, bedtime, school pickups, he noticed how his father mumbled vaguely about having plans that month. His mother hesitated before agreeing, glancing away as if distracted. Red flags flickered in his mind, but desperation drowned them out. If only he'd listened to his instincts, maybe things would have been different. The first red flag should have been the way my mother hesitated when I asked them to take care of my son. "Of course, Lucas," she said with a forced smile, her voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place: annoyance, disinterest. My father chimed in, mumbling something about their plans for the month but trailing off before finishing his sentence. At the time, I brushed it aside, telling myself they were just caught off guard by the request. But now, looking back, it was clear they weren't surprised. They were calculating. By the second day of my trip, their act was already in full swing. Every evening, I called home to check on my son. The calls always started the same way: cheerful chatter, laughter in the background, and vague reassurances that everything was fine. "Oh, he's such a good boy," my mother gushed one night. "We took him to the park today. He had so much fun running around." She paused dramatically, as if reminiscing. "He even helped me bake cookies this afternoon. You know how much he loves chocolate chips." But there was something off about her tone, a rehearsed quality, like she was reading lines from a script. And then there were the videos. Each call came with a new clip: my son playing in the backyard, laughing as he chased after a soccer ball. My parents sitting at the kitchen table, flour dusting their hands while my son grinned beside them. It all looked so normal. Too normal. It wasn't until the 4th day that I realized what was really happening. During one call, I heard faint music in the background, not the usual hum of the TV or radio, but upbeat, tropical tunes you'd expect on a cruise ship. Then came the sound of waves crashing against metal, barely audible but unmistakable. My stomach sank as I pieced it together. "Mom," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady, "where are you right now?" "Oh, we're just relaxing," she replied breezily, her words dripping with insincerity. "Your dad found these amazing deals online last minute, a short getaway. Don't worry, though. We left plenty of snacks for your son, and we'll be back soon." "Soon," I repeated, gripping the phone tighter. "What does soon mean? Where exactly are you?" Her response was evasive. "Just somewhere nice, honey. Nothing fancy. Now tell us about your work project. You must be busy." I wanted to scream. Instead, I hung up and stared at the videos they'd sent earlier. That's when I noticed it. The timestamps didn't match. The baking session video was dated 2 days before I left for my trip. The backyard footage, filmed weeks ago during a family barbecue. They weren't living in the present, they were fabricating an illusion, stitching together fragments of the past to cover their tracks. And still, they continued to lie. Every night, they assured me my son was asleep early after a big day. Every morning, they sent photos of him eating breakfast, smiling brightly. Meanwhile, they lounged on deck chairs sipping margaritas, oblivious to the storm brewing back home, not just outside my house, but within me. The storm hit on the 3rd night, vicious winds howling like a pack of wolves, rain pounding against windows, and thunder rolling so loudly it shook the ground. Bill sat in his recliner, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the unease gnawing at him. For 2 nights now, he'd heard crying coming from Lucas's house next door. At first, he thought maybe it was just a child upset over a nightmare. But tonight, the cries were different, desperate, raw, like something out of a horror movie. Bill clenched his fists as another crack of lightning lit up the sky, illuminating the silhouette of Lucas's empty driveway. He had knocked twice earlier that evening, but no one answered. Their car was still there, though. Kids don't cry like that unless something's wrong, he muttered under his breath. His instinct screamed at him to act, but what could he do? Breaking into someone else's property wasn't exactly legal. Yet, as the minutes dragged on and the cries grew louder, his resolve hardened. Grabbing a flashlight and a crowbar, he stepped outside into the chaos. Rain soaked through his jacket within seconds, but he barely noticed. Each step toward the house felt heavier than the last, weighed down by dread. When he reached the door, he pounded hard enough to rattle the frame. "Hello? Anyone home?" Silence. Then, faintly, the sound of muffled sobs drifted through the walls. Bill didn't hesitate. He wedged the crowbar between the door and its frame, bracing himself against the woodwork. With a grunt, he forced it open, splinters flying everywhere. Inside, the air was thick with neglect, a musty smell mixed with the metallic tang of fear. The dim light from his flashlight revealed a small figure huddled on the floor near the couch, trembling violently. It was Lucas's son, wearing nothing but a thin t-shirt, his face streaked with tears. "Hey, buddy," Bill said softly, crouching down despite his aging knees. "It's okay. You're safe now." The boy flinched at first, then lunged forward, clinging to Bill like a lifeline. His tiny hands were ice-cold, his body shaking uncontrollably. On the table lay a few stale granola bars and an untouched glass of water. Fury boiled inside Bill as he realized the truth. This kid had been left alone for days, abandoned without care or compassion. He pulled out his phone with trembling hands and dialed Lucas. "Lucas," he began, his voice tight with anger and urgency, "you need to get home. Now. You left him alone for 3 days." I shouted, my voice shaking with rage. "3 days, Mom. He's 6 years old." My mother rolled her eyes as if I were overreacting about nothing. "Oh, Lucas, don't be so dramatic. We left him food, didn't we? It's not like he was stranded in the woods." "Stranded in the woods," I repeated, incredulous. "He cried himself to sleep during a thunderstorm because you decided a cruise was more important than your grandson." Dad chimed in, sipping his coffee casually, as though this were just another morning argument. "Relax, Lucas. Kids have to learn independence. He's fine." I stared at them, my hands trembling with fury. "Independence. He still sleeps with a stuffed animal and can't even reach the top shelf in the kitchen. But sure, let's throw him into survival mode while you sip margaritas on a boat." Mom huffed, crossing her arms. "You're blowing this out of proportion. 3 days is no big deal. We survived worse growing up, didn't we? That's not the point." I snapped. "The point is that you abandoned him, your own flesh and blood, for a vacation." She smirked, leaning back smugly. "And what exactly did you do, Lucas? You ran off for work, leaving us to handle everything." "Don't act so high and mighty." Their casual dismissal of the situation made my blood boil. When I told them I'd canceled their credit card and taken back the car, they laughed, actually laughed as if it were some absurd joke. "You're being ridiculous," Dad muttered. "Cutting us off financially? That's elder abuse, Lucas." I clenched my fists, biting back a scream. Elder abuse? They had locked a child inside a house and vanished without a care. Yet somehow I was the villain. I stood in the driveway, gripping the car keys tightly in my hand, the same keys I had once handed over with pride. That car was supposed to be a gift, a token of gratitude for everything they had done, or so I thought. Now, it felt like a betrayal. Every time I looked at that vehicle, I saw their selfishness, the way they had used it to drive away, while my son cried alone in the dark. My hands shook as I yanked open the driver's side door and climbed inside. The leather seats still smelled faintly of the air freshener I bought them last Christmas. "This ends now," I muttered under my breath, turning the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, but instead of feeling triumphant, I felt hollow. Taking back the car wasn't just about reclaiming property, it was about drawing a line in the sand. They crossed it when they left my 6-year-old son behind. I drove straight to the bank, ignoring the calls from unknown numbers flashing on my phone. Inside, I met with an account manager who helped me freeze the emergency credit card. As I signed the paperwork, I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Emergency. Their emergency was a cruise ship buffet and pina coladas by the pool. That night, after tucking my son into bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and began drafting plans to move us out of the house. It wasn't just paranoia, it was survival. I knew my parents well enough to predict their next move. Guilt trips, threats, maybe even showing up unannounced. I wouldn't let them near him again. Not ever. The hardest part was telling my son we'd be leaving our home. "Why are we moving, Daddy?" he asked, his big eyes filled with confusion. It's for safety, buddy, I said softly, brushing his hair back. We're going somewhere where no one can hurt us. He nodded slowly, trusting me completely, and that trust cut deeper than any blade. How could I explain to a child that the people who were supposed to love him most had abandoned him without a second thought? By morning, I had hired a lawyer, a sharp-tongued woman named Sarah who didn't mince words. They'll try to play the victim, she warned me during our first meeting. But don't let them manipulate you. You're doing this for your son. Her words echoed in my mind as I packed boxes, each one another layer of distance between us and them. When I finally changed the locks, disconnected the landline, and updated my address, it felt like shedding skin. I was reborn not as their son, but as my boy's protector. The car stayed parked in the garage, untouched, a silent reminder of how far I'd come. The screech of tires on my driveway sent a chill down my spine. I already knew who it was before I opened the door. My parents, standing side by side like two overgrown children ready to throw a tantrum. But they weren't alone. Behind them, leaning against his beat-up pickup truck, was Uncle Roy, my mother's brother and the family enforcer. Lucas, Roy barked as he stepped forward, his massive frame towering over me. We need to talk. I crossed my arms, refusing to let him intimidate me. No, we really don't. Yes, we do. My mother snapped, her voice shrill with indignation. You've made this extremely difficult for us, young man. I almost laughed at the absurdity of her words. Difficult? You mean by taking away the car I bought you? By canceling the credit card you spent on a damn cruise? My father grumbled something under his breath, but Roy held up a hand like some self-appointed mediator. All right, let's just calm down. He turned to me, his tone patronizing. Look, Lucas, family takes care of family. That's how it works. That's funny, I shot back, because the last time I checked, family doesn't abandon a 6-year-old so they can drink margaritas on a boat. Roy sighed heavily, shaking his head as if I were a lost cause. You can't just cut them off like this. It's not right. They're struggling now because of you. Because of me. I blinked in disbelief. They left my son alone for 3 days. How are they even alive right now? They don't have a car. Lucas, Roy said, his voice dripping with condescension. How are they supposed to get around? I gestured toward him. You literally drove them here. Seems like they're doing just fine. My mother huffed, crossing her arms. That's not the point. We're your parents. You owe us. I stared at her, my jaw tightening. I owe you? My dad nodded, as if this were common sense. We raised you, didn't we? Fed you, clothed you. You didn't babysit me. Dad, I interrupted sharply. That's what parents are supposed to do. Roy stepped closer, his voice low and threatening. Be reasonable, Lucas. Just give them back the car and reinstate the card. This isn't that hard. I tilted my head, meeting his gaze without flinching. Reasonable? You think reasonable means letting them get away with abandoning my child? No. That's not how this works anymore. Roy's face darkened, his fists clenching slightly. You don't want to start a war over this. I smiled coldly, stepping forward until we were inches apart. Oh, Roy, do you think this is a war? A war is what happens if you ever show up at my house again and try to intimidate me. Because I'll call the cops so fast, they won't even have time to finish that stupid little speech you've got planned. For a moment, there was silence. Then my mother scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Lucas. We're your family. I looked her dead in the eye. No, you're not. Her face crumpled as if I'd slapped her. Without another word, I turned, walked inside, and slammed the door in their faces. I called Aunt Carol because she was the only one I trusted to listen without judgment. When she answered, her tone was sharp like everyone else. She'd already heard my parents' sob story about how I'd abandoned them. Lucas, she began, how could you do this to your own parents? I let her rant for 5 minutes straight, listing every supposed sin I'd committed. Then I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. Carol, I need you to hear me out. Everything they've told you is a lie. Her silence gave me space to explain. I sent her screenshots of their texts from the cruise, timestamps proving they ignored my calls while my son cried alone at home. I forwarded the fake videos they'd sent me, showing timestamps mismatched by days. They didn't just neglect him, they left him locked in a house with nothing but stale granola bars and lies. Carol gasped when I told her about Bill breaking in, finding my son shivering under a blanket, clutching his stuffed animal like it was his last lifeline. Oh my God, she whispered. Why would they do this? The next morning, Carol made sure everyone knew the truth. She posted screenshots of their messages on the family group chat, even tagging distant cousins who had sided against me. "This isn't loyalty, it's enabling," she wrote. Lucas didn't abandon anyone. His parents abandoned a 6-year-old child. At first, there was denial. My mom texted Carol furiously, "You're taking his side, after everything we've done for him?" But Carol wasn't having it. She replied publicly, "If you cared so much, why were you sipping margaritas while your grandson cried himself to sleep?" The tide turned quickly after that. Relatives who once accused me of cruelty now apologized profusely. One cousin messaged me privately, "I can't believe they tried to paint themselves as victims." Another added, "They always seemed selfish, but this is something else." Meanwhile, my parents desperately scrambled to defend themselves, spinning wild tales about how they had no choice and claiming their version of events was misunderstood. No one bought it. Even Uncle Roy stopped returning their calls. By the end of the week, they were pariahs cut off financially, socially, and emotionally. After the family turned their backs, my parents' world crumbled faster than they could have imagined. Without the car I had given them or access to the credit card they'd abused, they were stranded literally and figuratively. The vacation lifestyle they clung to so desperately was gone, replaced by mounting debts from years of reckless spending. Bills piled up on their kitchen table, unopened but impossible to ignore. Their phone calls to distant relatives went unanswered. Even Uncle Roy stopped picking up. Then came the lawsuit, a desperate attempt to reclaim what they thought was rightfully theirs. They hired a lawyer who seemed as clueless as they were, filing a case against me for emotional distress and elder abuse. According to them, taking away their car and freezing their credit card wasn't just cruel, it was criminal. My lawyer laughed when he read the complaint. "This is absurd," he said, shaking his head. "They left the child alone while sipping cocktails on a cruise ship, and now they're playing victims." Word spread quickly through our small community. Neighbors whispered about it at the grocery store. Friends texted me screenshots of social media posts mocking the lawsuit. One comment stood out, "If this isn't karma, I don't know what is." The more attention the case got, the more ridiculous it seemed. Even local news picked up the story not because it was groundbreaking, but because it was laughable. A reporter described it as a cautionary tale about entitlement and poor decision-making. By the time the court dismissed the case, which happened within weeks, my parents were pariahs. Their names became synonymous with selfishness in our town. People avoided them at church, ignored their emails, and crossed the street to avoid conversation. They tried to fight back, posting long rants online about how ungrateful I was, but no one cared. The final image of them is seared into my memory. Sitting on their porch, staring blankly at an overgrown yard, surrounded by unpaid bills and empty promises. No one visited. No one called. They had built their lives on manipulation and lies, and when those foundations collapsed, there was nothing left to hold them up. The rain hammered against the windows, a relentless downpour that seemed to echo the chaos we'd endured. Inside, the dim glow of the lamp illuminated the room just enough to soften the shadows. I sat beside my son on the couch, his small frame tucked under a blanket, as I read him a story. His breathing was calm now, steady, a stark contrast to the fear I'd heard in his voice days before. I glanced at him occasionally, my chest tightening with both love and resolve. No matter what storms raged outside, whether literal or metaphorical, I would shield him from harm. My parents' betrayal had taught me something invaluable. Family isn't defined by blood but by action. They chose themselves over him, proving they didn't deserve our trust. Cutting them off wasn't easy, but it was necessary. As thunder rolled in the distance, I pulled him closer, his head resting against my shoulder. For the first time in weeks, there was peace, not just in this room, but within me. Outside, the world might be chaotic, but here, under this flickering light, we were safe.